Alright, this will be a video debunking Brendan McCooney's series on value, on Marx, on whatever it is he's doing. I know he's explaining Marx's theory of value and talking about, like, I don't know what he's talking about. But I'm ignorant of Marx. I'll admit that I'm ignorant of Marx. So I'm just going to be responding to what Brendan McCooney says, and I'm going to be responding to this content here in these videos here. Okay? I'm not out to get Marx right. I'm not arguing against Marx here. I'm arguing against what Brendan McCooney says. Okay. First, he says that Leon Walras pioneered the marginalist revolution in response to Marxism in 1873. This is just matter-of-factly false on multiple counts. First, William Stanley Jevons proposed the theory in 1862 in a paper called A General Mathematical Theory of Political Economy, and then presented a finished theory in 1871. Karl Menger presented the same theory in 1871, so that's the first count that Brendan McCooney is wrong on. Two, while Leon Walras did incorporate marginalism into his Elements of Pure Economics, which laid the groundwork of general equilibrium theory, this was done in 1874, so that date is simply false, and Walras was not a pioneer of marginalism, though he did expand it into general equilibrium theory. Third, the first volume of Das Kapital wasn't published until 1967, 5 years after Jevons first proposed his theory. In 1871, Marx was still a nobody. I guess there's an outside chance that Jevons caught a whiff of what Marx was writing, but Marx was a nobody at the time. So no, marginalism was not a response to the challenge of Marxism. Anyway, then McCooney says that Keynes's work became popular due to the failures of liberal economics. And I'm not sure what he means by liberal economics, but I'm going to assume he's broadly referring to free market economists of varying degrees. Okay, fair enough. But this assertion is false for 3 reasons. First, the U.S. Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and just as Austrian business cycle theory would predict, there was a crash after the Fed printed too much money, and this crash occurred in 1919, 6 years later. But luckily, Woodrow Wilson had a series of debilitating strokes at this time, so wasn't able to interfere in the recovery. This is sometimes referred to as the stroke of luck, or America's strokes of luck. And so the Depression ended so fast that it is largely forgotten today. Even though the dip in the stock market as a percentage was greater in 1919 than in 1929. Second, in 1929, the state was much more prepared. Hoover had pioneered the cartelizing of businesses and got them to artificially keep up prices and wages in 1929 to 1932. Hoover's interventionism was so bad that Roosevelt ran on a ticket of cutting government. Roosevelt was running against the big government spender Hoover in 1932. He was running on a relatively free market campaign. I'm not going to call it relative to itself. I would say, anyway, Roosevelt was arguing against the big government spender Hoover. Later on, one of Roosevelt's aides, Rexford Tugwell, in an interview basically said that, yeah, most of the New Deal programs were either just straight up rebranding or expansions of programs that Hoover had already expanded, saying that Hoover had laid the groundwork and Roosevelt just, took the next step. And of course, Hoover once he got into office, did the opposite of what he said he would do in the campaign, and the result was exactly what a free marketer would predict: the largest depression up to that point in history. Ludwig von Mises predicted the 1929 crash. In the mid-1929, Mises turned down a lucrative job from a Viennese bank, much to the annoyance of his fiancée, proclaiming, "A great crash is coming, and I don't want my name in any way connected with it." Mises was so confident in his predictions that he turned down a high-paying job. John Maynard Keynes, on the other hand, lost his personal fortune in the 1929 crash, going along with the crowd. Keynes, mass man, yeah. And lastly, like the reason this is just dumb, Keynes's general theory was written in February of 1936, not 1929. These are dates and basic verifiable facts. And well, we're just over a minute into this first video. If this first part is any indicator of the quality of the series, we're going to be here for a while. Then Brendan McCooney does get it right that neoliberalism, broadly speaking, came into being after Keynesianism failed many times over, but then he makes this bizarre assertion that it had something to do with opposing women's movements, students' movements, and civil rights. Look, those are complicated issues, and I'm not going to go into the thicket of that. But if I'm not mistaken, on the Civil Rights Act, Milton Friedman supported ending forced segregation but opposed forced integration, right? Saying that racist firms would have to pay a premium and that thus would be disincentivized, and who would want to shop at a racist firm anyway? Right? It's a standard libertarian line. So no, Milton supported the 1964 Civil Rights Act but opposed the 1965 one. Anyway, then Brendan chose a clip of Alan Greenspan, who, as far as I'm concerned, is just a straight-up Keynesian. He's a statist hack. Greenspan apparently found a flaw in free market ideology, but then McCooney claims that this is an admission from the neoclassical establishment. Greenspan is Keynesian. I'm not going to go into that, but Greenspan supported, like, central banking. Okay, enough. And expansion of the money supply in order to provide soft landings. Just a bunch of nonsense. Yeah. So, Greenspan had nothing to do with free markets. What a lot of ultra states will do is they'll quote Greenspan and saying, see, even Alan Greenspan, a real free marketer, had problems with the free market, as if that's some sort of explosion from within. No. Greenspan is an outsider. Greenspan, by the time he was Fed chairman, let's be honest, he was losing brain cells. He was an old man. Look at him. He's kind of decrepit. And he was stupid. He couldn't think fast. Screw Greenspan. Anyway, Then Brendan McCooney goes to his bookshelf, and after saying that Marx was a god and panning his camera over the scriptures, it's clear that McCooney has like a fetish for like the sacred books, the sacred texts. He says that capitalism is prone to instability, inequality, exploitation, and crisis. And he has pictures of what we would consider bad things going on in ultra-statist countries. So like Africa, Southeast Asia, like areas with very low amounts of economic freedom, and then apparently trying to insinuate that the problems of ultra-statist areas are the fault of not enough statism. Then McCooney claims that free marketers blame reality for not conforming to their models. They're blaming reality for not conforming to their stupid models. And then, after saying that, McCooney immediately contradicts this by claiming that free marketers blame the current problems on state intervention, which is true, but also on labor movements and human greed. So it's like within 30 seconds he contradicts himself. Anyway, while free marketers will blame labor movements, they only do so in relation to their ability to invoke state power. No problem with labor movements if they're bargaining just as bargainers, right? I have no problem with bargaining. Anyway, same with greed, right, which leads to people buying off government officials, leading to institutionalized monopolies. I have no problem with people greedily creating a product and creating production processes that are really efficient and provide a lot of people with what they value, right? That way, greed can be good as long as there's no state to buy off and there's no kickbacks going on. Then McCooney says Republicans blame all problems on gays, the fact that the president is black, and on immigrants. And while Republicans do kind of suck, McCooney's criticism, this is all just lame, stock nonsense. And then after licking Marx's balls a little more, McCooney says that what distinguishes capitalism, which he has yet to define, is that in order to survive, you must exchange. And this can be true. It depends. If there are no laws against starting a subsistence farm in the woods, then you can have a subsistence farm in a free society surrounded by a bunch of other people who live in what McCooney would call capitalist mode. If you have no access to farmland, then you will have to exchange to survive, or find someone who's willing to, pay for you or whatever. It depends. And McCooney, like Marx, is just collapsing complexity into absolute statements. Very theological. Then McCooney says, people exchange things either through barter or a medium of exchange, or money. Right? He says that, but he says that in an incredibly awkward and involved manner, which makes me suspect that he didn't really understand what he said. Then McCooney, talking about the law of value, whatever the hell that is, says that economic forces exert themselves on society. Okay, and right now we have a common mistake that statists make. They view the market as above society. A market is just a description of human relations regarding certain things or services or whatever. You can have a market of blowjobs, right? There's relations in terms of services. Or another example would be the video game market. Video games are not above individuals. They come into existence because people are willing to labor for them and exchange the product of their labor for them. Okay, they are not impersonal forces. They are eminently personal forces. Then Mikuni confirms my suspicions that he doesn't know what he's talking about when he says, again, I'm paraphrasing him because he says it in an incredibly awkward manner. He says, people acquire means of production to produce more stuff, which is then exchanged for money to buy more means of production, which is all true, but then he says, regardless of the social cost. Right? And now this contradicts his earlier statement that people trade, and out of this trading, people arrange themselves in more complicated ways to trade better as if guided by some invisible hand, which he claimed to agree with. Okay, so this series is already completely shot because Mikuni doesn't know what a market is. That's a problem here. He doesn't know what a market is. Mikuni also claims that people attempt to produce value for its own sake in capitalism. And this can be true, but it's not necessarily true, as there are people who do jobs that produce less value for society, like being a teacher doesn't produce much value. Doesn't. And they'll take on these jobs just because they like that job. So people don't necessarily do that, and so maybe they can if they have some fetish, but so no, the existence of teachers disproves Mikuni's point there. Then Mikuni just brutally collapses complexity, saying that then what happens is that when capital gets concentrated, which can be true based on time preference management and inheritance, but to what degree is too concentrated? Like how much, how concentrated of capital is too concentrated? He then says you get poles of poverty and wealth, right? But wait a minute, is subsistence farming illegal now? If working for the capitalist is so bad and so exploitative, why are people doing it? Are cooperatives and employee-owned firms illegal? If so, if these things are outlawed, or de facto outlawed, then that's something you should smash the state for, so you can be free to engage in this superior kibbutz mode of production, if that's what you want to do. All right. Then Mikuni repeats the mystical canard that capital is above society, forgetting that firms which have all that capital make stuff that people buy. That is, they attempt to buy the right capital to produce things that can satisfy consumers. He then says that this leads to an antagonism between the people who own capital and those who don't. Yeah, doesn't explain why. He then says that this antagonism between the people who with capital and those without leads to periodic crises. Again, not explained. He doesn't explain how this antagonism comes about, and he doesn't explain how this antagonism leads to crises. And then Mikuni pans over his scriptures, says a bunch of corporate speak about how value can help you establish your goals and realize what you want and formulate your synergy and blah, 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 and pans over his scriptures and ends it right there. So, all right, that's my first takedown. Brendan Mikuni. I don't know how many of these things I'm going to do, but this first one was really, really bad. And it was really bad and really wrong in rather obvious ways. Brendan Mikuni is like a really stupid person. I think he may be like not all there.